Donald Berman sat in his new chair, a gift from his daughter Alison. Although it was not cheap, it had been highly praised by orthopedists and physiotherapists. And Alison had even claimed that the same chair was in Dr. House's office, whom she admired. The businessman was touched by his daughter's concern, hoping that the chair would make his work hours more comfortable. But now even the German chair seemed uncomfortable to Donald, perhaps because his young and angry daughter was sitting opposite him, drilling him with a deadly look. Alison frowned and crossed her arms, assuming a closed posture, nervously tapping her foot under the table. In such moments, she reminded Donald of an angry cat waving its tail like a pendulum before digging its claws into somebody's face. Tension reigned between father and daughter. It's just like a scene from the Wild West, thought the father as he looked at his daughter's narrowed green eyes. It seemed like two cowboys were waiting for the signal to draw their revolvers from their holsters. "You know," said the man after the pause had dragged on, "you won't achieve anything with a disapproving look. I don't want my daughter to be a doctor. That's it." "You don't understand me," retorted the girl. "Although that's normal. The problems between fathers and children are an eternal story. Many novels are dedicated to it." Donald, unable to contain himself, rolled his eyes to the ceiling and muttered, "Excellent example, daughter. Now that you mention the novels, I should notice that many of the doctors in them died from contact with the sick. Are you really accusing me of not wanting such a fate for you?" Now it was Alison's turn to look up at the ceiling. Donald thought about how much they looked alike. The resemblance was both physical and temperamental. That was the problem. Both the daughter and the father were stubborn. Even as a child, Alison constantly expressed her opinion and pouted her lower lip if she was dissatisfied with something. Donald believed that he was to blame for his daughter's stubbornness. Christina, his wife, died when Alison was 5. The grieving man gave all his love and care to his daughter, spoiling her. No, Alison didn't make the news for drunk driving or dancing topless on a club's bar. On the contrary, she was intelligent and goal-oriented. Only her new obsession didn't give Donald peace. Instead of working in the family business, she decided to cure people of colds and diarrhea. It was a knife in the back of the businessman who had hoped for his daughter's support. The Berman's business was related to aesthetic medicine. He supplied the equipment to hospitals and clinics. Recently, Donald also opened his own plastic surgery clinic. Only Alison, having taken the Hippocratic Oath, had decided that she didn't want to fix rich women's noses. She wanted to help ordinary people. "After all, I raised the second Mother Teresa," grumbled Donald to himself. "Give her a chance and she'll pack her bags and become a Red Cross volunteer." "You just don't understand," Donald tried to reason with his daughter. "You slept on silk sheets and studied at the best university, Alison. Being a doctor in an ordinary hospital is a thankless job." The girl's nostrils flared with indignation. "First, you don't want me to give up luxury, and then you reproach me for it," she exclaimed, throwing up her hands. "I'm not going to Africa. I'll just be assigned to some hospital in our country. What's wrong with it?" "What if it's in some backwater? There isn't any romance," Donald exploded, restraining himself from hitting the table with his fist. Alison sighed and looked around the office. There were various figures of this world on the walls, from writers to scientists and businessmen who had left their mark on history. There were Freud, Kubrick and Ford. None of them were idols to her father. The interior designer had just decided that they would fit perfectly into the work atmosphere. Alison clearly knew more about these people than her father did. She looked at the black and white portrait of Steve Jobs and turned sharply to her father, asking, "Do you know what Steve Jobs said before he died?" The man tiredly rubbed his nose. "Did he say that children's disobedience was the way to their success? Or did he advise kicking the chicks out of the nest to teach them to fly faster?" Alison clicked her tongue and said, "No, He said that the older we become, the smarter we get, and we gradually realize that the clock that costs $30 and the clock that costs $300 show the same time. No matter how much your car costs, the roads will remain the same, and so will the destinations. And you can be lonely in a big or small house. Her father interrupted her, asking, "And where are you going with this?" Alison replied fervently, "To the fact that in the village as well as in the city there are people. I have decided to help them." Her father raised his voice, saying, "Let those who have no other options help them. I raised you for a different life." The girl jumped up from her seat and put an end to their conversation with a sharp and categorical decision. She declared, "I'll go work wherever they send me, even treating villagers for typhus, so don't interfere." Alison lifted her chin and left the office. Donald, watching her leave, sighed wearily. He knew that Alison's aspirations may have been commendable, but she did not understand how much hierarchy mattered in the modern world. Money only went to money, not the other way around. Alison, born with a silver spoon in her mouth, was determined to throw it away. She did not realize how hard it was to be poor, as she had never needed anything since birth. The man looked at Steve Jobs with displeasure for putting such crazy thoughts into his daughter's head. Then he turned his gaze to a snapshot of little Alison in a yellow dress on his desk and grumbled. If only she tried to live in the village, then she would understand how wrong she was and appreciate her daddy. At that moment, an idea came into the businessman's head, like a light bulb in cartoons. Donald grabbed the phone and dialed the number he needed. "Hey, Dennis," the man smiled. "How are you?" "Slowly but surely," came the reply. "Thanks to your sponsorship, everything is going well." "I'm pleased to hear. Listen," the man said, getting down to business. "Can you still influence the internship of medical students? My daughter just finished college and she wants to help people." "No problem," Dennis replied. "Where are we placing her? To the capital clinics?" "To the village of some god-forsaken town," Donald replied. "The most remote place you can find on the map, where it takes a week to run through the forest and bang on a pan, scaring away bears, just to get to the hospital." There was silence on the line, then Dennis burst out laughing. "You're a joker, Donald," he gasped. "No, I'm serious. Send her to the worst hospital," the businessman said. "The most forgotten place you can find." And so began Alison's adventures. When Donald decided to send his daughter to the middle of nowhere, he hoped to knock some sense into her. He expected Alison not to even bother packing her bags when she found out where she was going. But Alison wanted to prove to her father that money wasn't everything. So she took off for Long Hill, where a place in a rural clinic awaited her. Alison travelled through forests, fields and thickets to reach the place. The doctor was given a simple house, just like the others, one floor, brick, with a tile roof. There was an old and gloomy house right next door to the doctor's house. It was wooden with windows, some of which were boarded up, clearly not meant for habitation. It was so dilapidated that if the big bad wolf from the tail of the three little pigs came, huffed and puffed, the building would collapse. At first, the girl enjoyed her new life. Breathing seemed easier away from the neon signs and city bustle. However, she soon encountered difficulties. They were not related to the cold floors, intermittent power outages, or lack of familiar products, but to the local suspicion of her as a stranger driving an expensive car. Local tractor drivers, shepherds and farmers gossiped that selling her car could buy the entire village and its residents as slaves. No one understood why such a well-groomed and young beauty came to their backwater. They were constantly testing Alison's strength, waiting for a catch. Despite this, Alison gathered her will and got down to work. She helped those in need, treating everyone with care and attention. Having recently graduated from college, she had not yet burned out or become callous. so every problem was important to her. With equal enthusiasm, Alison pulled splinters out of carpenters' fingers, treated scrapes on children's knees, and listened to elderly women complain about high blood pressure and drought killing their cucumbers in the garden. After a month, Alison got used to her new life, and the locals accepted her, and that's when the real horror began. Alison started sleeping poorly, hearing footsteps, creaks, and the mournful howling of dogs at night. She even got up at night and wandered around the house, armed with pepper spray and a smartphone, but found no one. Noticing her paleness and dark circles under her eyes, one of her regular patients, Mrs. Smith, grumbled, "You're worried about us, dear, but you're not taking care of yourself. Look how pale you've become, like a ghost." Alison tiredly smiled. "Well, thank you, Mrs. Smith, for the compliment." Hiding a yawn behind her palm, Alison explained, "You know, at night I always hear something. It's scary to be alone in the house." The old woman squinted. "You live next to the bad house where the windows are boarded up. It belonged to the former doctor. Have you noticed that it's close by? Your house was built later, on the same site. No one wanted to live in the old one." "Why not? Was the doctor a bad doctor?" Alison asked. "No, he treated everyone like everyone else." Mrs. Smith waved her dry hand. "But he went crazy. He was a good doctor, but one day his wife went to pick blueberries in the woods and disappeared. The whole village searched for her but didn't find her. The doctor started drinking out of grief. Then he took his own life. When they discovered the disappearance and opened the house, they learned of even more horrors. It turned out that he hit his wife and put her in the basement. She refused to live in the village and was going to leave him. In a fit of anger, he hit her, and he couldn't live with the guilt. He left a note of repentance. They say he still wanders there. After all, those who have decided to part with life themselves are not expected anywhere. People hear footsteps and see lights in the windows, but no one dares to go and check." Alison was a skeptic. She didn't believe in what she couldn't see, touch, or scientifically prove. Therefore, mermaids, forest spirits, and house spirits, about which the locals had already told her, didn't bother her. However, Mrs. Smith's story made the doctor's spine tingle. She did hear footsteps, but she never thought that they could be coming from the neighbouring house. Alison's workday was busy, so thoughts of the ghost doctor flew out of her head. Today a tractor driver cut his hand. She had to stitch it up and tie a bow on top, so the grown man wouldn't be too upset. Children with ringworm were brought in. They found some ill cats somewhere, kissed them, cuddled them, and caught the infection. Well, and a mountain of paperwork. Alison came home, barely managed to cook a simple dinner, and wanted to go to bed. And then she heard a creaking sound very close to her. Slept left the girl, and her eyes widened. She strained to listen and now understood that Mrs. Smith was right. She was looking for the source of the sounds in the wrong place. The noise was coming from the house next door, which was almost touching Alison's bedroom. There was only a low fence and a metre of land separating the two houses. She cautiously pushed aside the curtain and looked out the window. She gasped and hid behind the wall. There was definitely someone's shadow there, she thought fearfully. At first it was quiet, and then there was a sharp bam! And could it be someone's scream? Alison broke out in a cold sweat. "Well, I definitely won't go there," she muttered to herself to calm down. That's the law of any horror story. Don't check the basement, attic, or abandoned houses, especially at night and especially alone. That's how roosters fend off evil spirits. Dawn will come, and then I'll check. Alison didn't even realise at what point she started to believe in the power of roosters, and that the third rooster crow drives away all evil. She couldn't remember who told her this, whether it was Mrs. Smith or old Mrs. Madison. However, she now thought about getting such a useful bird for herself, or drawing circles of salt. The next morning, Alison had a day off. In the daylight, her nighttime fears subsided. The girl gathered her courage and went to the neighbouring plot. After all, the existence of a ghost still had to be proven, but her insomnia was real. The house was quiet. Alison squinted and shone her smartphone flashlight to see the surroundings. An old stove, a fallen bench, a rough table. At first, Alan decided that this was an ordinary, abandoned house. But the more she walked around, the more she realised that someone still lived there. Dust and cobwebs were not everywhere. She saw traces of someone else's meal, berries, fruits, corn husks and eggshells, and Alison also noticed rags with hardened blood. "Okay, enough for my impressions," she muttered and stepped back to the door. And then there was a loud creaking sound, and following that was a mild series of sounds resembling the patter of small feet, as if someone with light steps was walking around the house, hiding. Here, the girl almost started to recite the Lord's Prayer. She already imagined how the ghostly doctor rushed to meet his colleague, so to speak, to discuss new trends in medicine. Alison sharply turned around, intending to run away. That's not her business, however. Another annoying creak made the doctor scared and stumble in the dark. She stumbled over a fallen chair and fell to the wooden floor. The phone, along with the source of light, hit the floor, went out, and disappeared somewhere in the corner of the room. Alison cursed and tried to get up, but cried out in pain. The doctor managed to sprain her ankle. Out of anger and frustration, Alison whimpered like a little girl. She was ashamed and embarrassed. She came to a stranger's house as if hunting for ghosts, and even hurt her leg, and most likely broke her phone. "May I help you?" a quiet voice sounded. Alison froze, and her heart jumped to her throat, then fell to her heels. She looked into the darkness, crawling on the floor back to the exit. Who is here?" she whispered fearfully. And then, when she expected to see something mystical in the beam of light that penetrated the boards on the window, a boy stood up. "Oh my God," the girl cried out in her heart. "You're a child." The skinny boy in old torn clothes looked like he was 8 to 10 years old. His tousled light brown hair was covered in cobwebs, probably hiding in one of the corners of the house. The light brown eyes looked at the girl with suspicion and danger. "Does it hurt?" he repeated. Alison was surprised. Despite the fact that the child was also afraid of her, he was worried about the uninvited guest. "What are you doing here?" Alison looked at the boy incomprehensively. "I live here," the boy answered hoarsely, and a challenge flickered in his eyes. "Alone?" Alison clarified. He shrugged. "I used to live with my mum in another village. She died 2 years ago from an illness," the boy explained. "Then they took me to an orphanage. It's not far away." The boy waved his hand somewhere to the side, as if Alison could see the orphanage itself. The boy decisively approached. "Let me help you." Here Alison noticed that the child himself was lame. One of his legs was wrapped in rags. "And what about you?" She nodded at his leg. "I tried to catch fish to eat, but the stone was slippery and sharp. I cut my leg and couldn't walk for 2 days," he complained. The young doctor immediately got busy, forgetting about her stretching. She brought the boy home, took out the first aid kit, and treated the wound that had dirt in it. Then she told the boy, whose name was Kevin, to wash off the layer of dirt. Finding her black tracksuit, she handed it to the boy. Then she sat him at the table and, watching how hungrily the child ate her casserole, began to ask. "Why did you run away from the orphanage?" she asked. Kevin sniffed. "It's bad to live there. Better alone. I was recently taken to a foster family, but then returned. Since then, they have called me a stray dog and also defective. They think it's only defective children who are returned. They think I'm bad, you know, that I didn't do anything." The child began to justify himself. "It's just that their son was jealous of me to his parents. He always made up nonsense. He said I hit him and broke things, but I didn't do that. They just believed their own son and returned me." Alison's heart sank. She was shocked by the child's fate and the cruelty of people who gave him hope and then threw him away like an unwanted thing. "And how long have you been living here alone?" she asked. "Maybe a week or two," Kevin said thoughtfully. "I sit at home during the day and go out for food at night. Everyone is afraid of this house. Nobody from the local community comes here. I steal fruit and eggs. That's how I live." Alison was at a loss. She didn't know what to do with Kevin next. As if reading her mind, he looked at her imploringly and said, "You won't send me back, will you? I won't go to the orphanage. I'll run away again." His voice trembled, and at the same time, Alison's heart trembled again. She smiled softly and stroked the boy's tangled hair. "No, Kevin, I won't send you back," she said confidently. Donald Berman was driving his SUV, looking at the rural scenery. His stubborn daughter recently disappeared from the radar. Her phone stopped answering a week ago. Of course, the man was worried and went to visit Alison personally. He hoped that she would return to the family nest, realizing that she was wrong. However, time passed and it didn't happen. The man had imagined many scary things, but reality turned out to be much more interesting. He didn't find Alison's house right away. He stopped at a store and asked the saleswoman where to find the new doctor. "Alison," the woman smiled. "She lives in the 5th house with a blue roof, with her brother. If you're going there, take some goodies. Thanks to Alison, my disease finally went away, and now I feel better." The woman handed the stunned businessman bags of cookies and candy. "With brother?" Donald gasped. "Yeah, with her younger brother Kevin." The saleswoman shrugged and turned to the next customer. Donald, with sweets in hand, rushed to find the house with the blue roof. And finally he found the house, his daughter, and his supposed son, who had appeared out of nowhere. The boy was picking cherries under a bush. "Alison," the man exclaimed, calling his daughter, "please tell me, when did I have a son?" The boy looked up in surprise. Alison turned around to see a man standing at the edge of her yard. "Dad?" she said in shock, dropping the spoon she was holding. "I didn't know you were coming." Her father looked at her quizzically, taking in the scene before him. "Who's this?" he asked, gesturing towards the boy. Alison hesitated for a moment before introducing Kevin as her friend. The girl told him how she broke her phone and shared the story of Kevin. "To prevent gossip from locals, I called him my brother," the girl explained, looking tenderly at the child, who was washing berries for compote. "He helps me a lot and tries very hard. He's a good and sincere boy." "That's illegal. You should call the orphanage," the man said, shaking his head. "If you do that, I'll adopt him," the girl said. "I've looked into the orphanage. They didn't even search for him, you know. They don't care that a child went missing. But that's not your responsibility. You can't just take all the homeless people home." "Why not? It's possible," Alison answered defiantly. The father, angered by his daughter, wanted to leave. "Well, you're alive, and that's all I wanted to know." However, fate had other plans. The car broke down. Donald had to stay as a guest at his daughter's and her named brother's place. That was the turning point in the businessman's life. He saw with his own eyes how life flows calmly in the village. He realized how many kind and sincere people surrounded his daughter. Even if they were simple, they were kind. Kevin took Donald fishing. The businessman realized that he hadn't held a fishing rod in his hands for 30 years because of work. even though he loved it in his youth. In a couple of days, the locals repaired his car, but Donald didn't want to leave. The man stayed for another day, and then another, and another. His soul became attached to the boy. He waved his hand and took legal guardianship over him. "I need someone to go fishing with," Donald grumbled when a happy Kevin hugged his new father by the neck. Alison just wiped away her tears. Many, many years passed, and Donald finally found a worthy successor for his business. When Kevin grew up and finished school, he happily followed in his father's footsteps. Alison left the village as she went for a promotion. However, they still often visited Long Hill, as it was really easier to breathe there.